This is the nation station, WLW in Cincinnati, your Clear Channel service.
Ironically, the chair of the Senate was occupied by the president's brother when the president was shot. Senator Edward Kennedy had been presiding over a rather dull session. A Richard Riedel, who mans one of the doors to the Senate lobby, brought the news into the Senate of what had happened and had the terrible job of telling Senator Kennedy that his brother had been shot. And here is Mr. Riedel's story.
Richard Riedel, which you've already given my name. Press liaison, which means contact between the Washington correspondents, members of the press gallery, radio, television correspondents, White House news photographers, and the periodical press, with the senators on the floor, arranging appointments, asking them questions. In the 45 years I have been on the staff of the Senate, since September 27, 1918, when I was a 9-year-old boy and a page for 4 years, this is one of the hardest blows and one of the most moving, tragic experiences that I have ever known to sweep over the Senate. I may, if there's time later, mention when President Roosevelt died and President Truman, Vice President, then was presiding when the word of his death came. Well, the tickers in the lobby, AP and UP tickers, are read by senators and staff members for routine information. Phyllis Rock of the staff of Senator Morse of Oregon was in the lobby by herself reading the ticker. She turned to one of my assistants, Tom Pelican, who is with Senator Long of Missouri in his office part of the time, and said the president has been shot. Tom rushed out to tell me. I immediately went into the Senate chamber in front of the desk of Majority Leader Senator Mike Mansfield, raised my voice so that he and the senators at the surrounding desk could hear, and said, "Senators, the president has been shot." It, of course, was like a shock wave, a jolt. I crossed the aisle to the Republican side, where Senator Dirksen was seated, and in the same manner told Senator Dirksen and the Republican senators who were at adjacent desks, with, of course, the same shocked reaction and stunned expression on their faces. I then happened to recall that a few moments before, the president's brother, Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts, was presiding over the Senate. I turned and he was still occupying the chair. I knew that someone would have to inform him. I thought I might as well. It was a very difficult job because of the family relationship as well as the friendship of the senators to the president. I rushed up to the chair and said, Senator Kennedy, your brother, the president, has been shot." He gave a jerk to his body tensed, but he was absolutely calm. And as I recall, Senator Kennedy, then presiding over the Senate, when he heard this awful news, said no. And that was all. In an orderly manner, he gathered up the papers on his desk his routine office work that he brings when he presides over the Senate, so that he can conserve the time, the long hours presiding over the Senate by working at his office work. I walked off the rostrum with him with my arm around Senator Kennedy, patting his shoulders, and said, "Senator, if there's anything any of us can do, let us know. My own suggestion would be that you contact the Air Force and have them rush you out to Texas to your brother's side in a military jet."
Well, of course, that turns out now to be Unnecessary because the president's body is being flown back to Washington, and it's expected to arrive there at 5:30 p.m., and in that connection, we can report that President Johnson is expected to take the oath of office as President of the United States aboard an airliner before flying immediately back to the nation's capital. The entire Kennedy party, of course, is flying back immediately to Washington. And from Dallas, the mystery concerning exactly how and why this assassination occurred seems to increase rather than decrease with the passing of time and the gaining of more information. The Dallas Police Department has arrested a 24-year-old man, Lee H. Oswald, in connection with the slaying of a Dallas policeman shortly after President Kennedy was assassinated. The man is also being interrogated to see if he had any connection with the slaying of the president. Oswald was pulled screaming and yelling from the Texas Theater in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas. He brandished a pistol. Officers took it away from him after a scuffle. Police officer M.N. McDonald, who was cut across the face in the scuffle, quoted Oswald as saying after he was subdued, "Well, it's all over now." That may or may not mean anything in connection with the assassination of the president. A large crowd was congregated around the theater and witnessed the arrest. Police had to hold the crowds back because many apparently connected the arrested man with the slaying of the president and wanted to get at the man. The officer who was slain earlier was J.D. Tippit. He'd been killed by a man answering the description of Oswald in the neighborhood a short time before. Tippit had been slain with a pistol. As you know, the assassination of the president was accomplished by a German Mauser 7.65 rifle. Robert Kennedy has left his Virginia estate, his Virginia home, for the airport to fly to Texas. But whether or not he was intercepted at the airport and told to remain in Washington, we do not know. And we also repeat to you that the identity of the assassin of President Kennedy, or assassins in case there were more than one, is not immediately known. We do know that he was shot from the 5th floor of a warehouse opposite the highway where the tragic event took place. Dr. Malcolm Perry, the attending surgeon at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, said when he arrived at the emergency room, "I noticed the president was in critical condition with the wound of the neck and head." When asked if possibly the wounds could have been made by 2 bullets, he said he did not know. He said immediate resumptive measures were taken, and Dr. Kemp Clark, chief of neurosurgery, was called along with several other members of the staff. Dr. Perry said they arrived immediately, but at this point the president's condition was critical and moribund, meaning that he was dying. A tracheotomy was performed to assist the president's breathing. The doctors said an oxygen machine was used, and an electrocardiograph machine was attached to record any heartbeat. When asked to specify, Dr. Perry said the entrance wound was in the front of the head. Before, we had been told it was from temple to temple. Well, of course, that could be in front of the head.
Eisenhower.
Former President Dwight Eisenhower today called the assassination of President Kennedy a despicable act. The former president, in a statement issued from his suite at a hotel in New York, said this: "I share the sense of shock and dismay that all Americans feel at the despicable act that resulted in the death of our nation's president. Mrs. Eisenhower and I also join with all other citizens in expressing our personal grief and prayerful concern to Mrs. Kennedy and all other members of the family." Take note of that one statement about our nation's president. Oftentimes, people confuse the person of the man in the White House with the office of the presidency. No doubt the assassins did that. They do not recognize, they could not, the terrible harm they're doing to 180 million people and the chief office of those people, not to a mere man named John F. Kennedy. Comment from Chief Justice Earl Warren. He says, "I was stunned and shocked to hear of the president's death." It's interesting to note that Chief Justice Warren had sworn President Kennedy in as the chief executive of our nation. And now more details on Moscow, the way the news has been broken to the people of Russia. Wlw-Radio broke into its home services news bulletin to tell Soviet listeners that President Kennedy had been shot. This was before the news of the president's death had reached Moscow through official channels. The home service in Moscow is a service beamed directly to all newspaper offices in the Russian republics, and it is relayed from there to various radio stations throughout Soviet Russia. From State Line, Nevada, actor Peter Lawford, the president's brother-in-law, when told of the assassination, cried, "Oh, my God." He's married to the sister of President Kennedy. Incidentally,